Hi, I'm Scott Hanselman. I'm here to tell you it's finally happened. It's Visual Studio Community 2013. It's a new SKU for Visual Studio. It's free. It supports extensibility. This means that you've got Web Essentials, Productivity Power Tools, Xamarin, F#, Node, Python, websites, Windows Store, Windows Phone. It's a SKU for you and me, for small teams, for students, for people getting started, people building great applications, great open source. It's happening. It's Visual Studio Community. I'm excited about this because it works with Azure. It works with Visual Studio Online. It works with Git. It works with the tools that you know and love. You can get it now. It's free. It's new. Visual Studio Community 2013. I'm going to go get it. You should download it. Let's hear from the folks in the studio more details about Visual Studio Community 2013.
Hi, and welcome to an episode on Visual Studio Community. Thank you so much to Scott Hanselman for doing the introduction there. So I'm here to dive deeper into the details, and to help me, I have two folks with me. I have a Director of Program Management, Amanda Silver, who's going to demonstrate Apache Cordova tools. Hi, Amanda. Welcome to the video.
Hi, Dmitry. Thanks for inviting me.
No problem. I also have with us Steve Dower, who's going to demo Python. He's an engineer on the Python tools for Visual Studio. Hey, Steve.
Hey, Dmitry.
Not your first time in Channel 9?
It's not my first time.
I think you did like one video so far before this?
I've done a VS Toolbox on this, and hopefully plenty more to come.
Cool.
It's fun.
Well, today we're here to talk to you about community, so let's dive into it. What is community? Why are we all so excited? Why is Scott Hanselman doing such an excitable introduction about it? Visual Studio Community is a brand new SKU of Visual Studio. It's a powerful SKU because it unifies into one place where you can develop any kind of app that you want to work on. So think about before where you had many different Express SKUs that you would have to work with, or certain things that just didn't work anywhere in the Microsoft ecosystem. You now have one SKU you can download, which is Visual Studio Community. And in that SKU, you can work on desktop, you can work on web, Windows Store, or even cross-platform apps. It's a really great IDE, and it gives you even more capabilities than we used to include in the Express SKUs themselves. We also have the first-time extensibility. Extensibility is super important because to get Apache Cordova tools, to get tools for Python, you need to install extensions into Visual Studio. Now, Express had some limitations, and even though we've worked through some of them for certain tools, there was still way too much confusion how to get started. All that confusion goes away, right? It makes it much easier. You can now just install Community, and then you can get Apache Cordova tools, you can get Python tools, F# tools, you can install third-party things from Xamarin, you can install open source community extensions. We'll go for a list in a second here, but it's going to make things just a lot easier. It's also free, and that's an important part. Visual Studio Community is a free SKU. Think of it as like another twin in the Express family, where Community now is a unified SKU. It's a free SKU for students. It's free for open source developers, for small teams, and many other folks out there. You should definitely check out the EULA to make sure you're using it correctly. But really, we think a lot of folks will finally be able to take advantage of Visual Studio, this one free unified SKU. And it's connected to the cloud. It's connected to Visual Studio Online and Azure, all the things that you kind of expect from Visual Studio. So let's talk about Azure. Even though the things that I have up here right now are not something that's specifically related to Community, in other words, it's not like it took Community for you to use this. You could have used this before Community. But I want to make sure that you understand that we have a whole set of free offerings that you can take advantage of. This is great, especially if you're new to our ecosystem, to the Microsoft development ecosystem. For example, our cloud platform, Azure, has a bunch of free offerings. We have free Azure websites, we have free Azure mobile services, tiers of service capability that you can take advantage with. There's also a trial offer, or even better, for work or for some other place, if you have Amazon subscription, of course, you don't even need Community. You can take advantage of higher versions of Visual Studio. You can take advantage of the cloud. But even if you don't have that, the great thing is, as at least web development, for example, you're not blocked from using your cloud. You also have Visual Studio Online. With Visual Studio Online, you have the ability to, as a small team of up to 5 people, you can go ahead and start working together on your work items, your source control using Git. It's an integrated ALM solution that is integrated fully with Visual Studio. So for example, when we're talking about Apache Cordova or Python tools, this is not something weird that you can't use with our ALM solution. It works great with Visual Studio Online, Team Foundation Server on premises, or if you want to use something like GitHub, it works as well because, hey, Visual Studio supports Git now. So that's a great feature. And you can learn all about it on Azure or visualstudio.com websites. We also have now, kind of coming back to the extensions point, a ton of extensions that you can take advantage with. The list that I have up here is just some of the extensions. This isn't everything, but if you think about our community, in other words, people out there, some people that work at Microsoft, some people that are just our MVPs or other community members, they're making these extensions to make Visual Studio better. And now there's no more any restrictions. If you have community installed, you can use web essentials, you can use indent guides, you can go use third-party things from Redgate like .NET Reflector. You have the ability to install everything that we have on this list, including Xamarin tools to do cross-platform development. So we're really hoping that small teams and startups and students can just go ahead and say, hey, I'm going to get started with Visual Studio. That's kind of the goal here. And today, we don't want to just keep talking and talking. We want to show you some demos. And the first demo that we're going to jump into is with Amanda on Apache Cordova. So Amanda, maybe you can talk a little bit about sort of what Apache Cordova tools in Visual Studio enable you to do.
Sure. So Apache Cordova is an open source project that's part of the Apache Foundation. And what it allows you to do is to build cross-platform applications using HTML, JavaScript, and CSS to build applications for mobile platforms, iOS, Windows, and Android. So that means that you can basically use your existing skills with web technologies, web standards technologies, to build mobile apps, which is pretty cool. And of course, you get, with the integration in Visual Studio, you get the great, powerful experience that you've come to expect with the IntelliSense and the rapid debugging and all that kind of stuff in Visual Studio. Now, it was actually, with the Express SKUs, it was actually kind of hard to be able to enable that because your typical mobile application today actually spans tiers. We could have offered it in the web Express SKU. We could have offered it in the Windows Express SKU or in a client Express SKU. But really, to build a powerful mobile application, you need kind of all of the tiers to be able to do it.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. The other thing that's really cool that I'll show you in a minute is that we've really been working on the debugging capabilities so that you can actually debug into your application when it's running on an iOS host or when it's running on an Android host. So I'll show you that in a minute. But then the last thing I want to kind of say is that, you can use all of the application lifecycle management capabilities with the Community Edition as well. So you can get all the source code control that you need and everything else.
Yeah, so you can work on an app with a bunch of folks, but like a small group of people can get together, they can use Visual Studio Online, they can share their source, or they can use GitHub if they want to make this an open source project. It all works right from Visual Studio.
Absolutely. Yeah. So this isn't a toy SKU for Play apps.
Yeah. Now I notice you have a Mac. Do you need a Mac to develop for Apache Cordova?
You don't. So what you do need a Mac for is to do the final build for an iOS device. This is part of Apple's licensing rules.
Sure, that's what they require us to do. If you want to do that, that's what you have to do.
Right, exactly. But that means that you can basically have a Windows machine that's running Visual Studio that's doing most of your development environment, and I could have a Mac Mini that's hosted in my team room or something like that I use for the final build. But for the most part, because I'm showing that in the demo today, I wanted to kind of have it all be co-located.
Cool. And what kind of devices can people use to test? Can you test right on a Android phone or Windows phone, iPhone?
Yeah, all of the major mobile platforms. You can just stick in a USB and tether the device, and then you can just deploy the app and start debugging.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's take a look at the demo.
Sure. Great. So I have the tools for Apache Cordova installed on the Community Edition here. And what you can see is that with that, I have new templates that are under TypeScript and JavaScript. TypeScript is a language that is a superset of JavaScript that allows you to build strongly typed classes and modules and things like that in JavaScript so that you can have large-scale applications that you can work on with more than one person, or have you can reason about in a better way.
Yeah, but you don't have to use TypeScript.
You don't have to use TypeScript. So what you can see here is that we also have the Apache Cordova apps under the JavaScript node as well. And in this case, I've actually created an app that uses JavaScript. So I'll show you what I'm using here.
Cool.
So let me just go to an existing application. And let me just give you a quick tour around the application. Now, one of the things that you can see here that really the Community Edition enables is that I have both the client tier, which is this parking space booking.cordova app, as well as the server tier in this particular solution. And I can work on both of them in the Community Edition, whereas previously I would have to use a higher level SKU to be able to do that. But this really is just a web application, essentially. So what you can see here is that in terms of the technologies that I'm using, for the scripts, I'm using Angular, which is a very common and popular JavaScript library. And if I look at, some of the images in the app, some of the CSS, I'm actually using less in this case. So as you see, the file that I have open is form.les.
So taking advantage of open source standards to build these apps, right? So whatever your good sort of practices are on the web, you can use them here as well.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not like you need to learn new things.
Cool.
Now, the only thing that really is new to an Apache Cordova app in terms of coming from a web background is that you actually have device capabilities. So if I go to config.xml, this is basically like an app manifest for your app. And what you can see here is that in addition to building the web technology, I also have plugins that really give me access to device capabilities. And if I go to the installed tab, you can see that I can use device, I can use splash screen, I can use the camera, and these are things that are device capabilities that aren't always available in the browser context for the mobile device that you're going to be deploying to. So this is what really allows you to use web technologies but not have to compromise on the capabilities that you might want to expose to your app. Yeah. So that's what's pretty cool.
And there's like a whole marketplace of these plugins. We support anything that's out there, right? You can plug in.
I wouldn't even call it a marketplace because there's basically a huge open source
free
repository.
Yes, marketplace implies you can pay for it, but here it's a repository.
Right, exactly.
Cool.
So next thing I'm going to show you guys is that I'm actually going to just go ahead and deploy it to an iOS simulator. Now, again, I told you guys I was running in parallel, so we'll just see that happen on the screen in a second. So I'm just going to press play here, and you can see that I'm starting to build. I'm going to tab over to the OS X environment, and you can actually see that the build is happening locally on the OS X environment. Now let's just go to the start screen again for the simulator, and then it'll get redeployed.
Cool. So this could have been happening if you had, like you said, a Mac Mini, right? So if you have a Mac Mini, you can be on your desktop, on your PC, you can be connected to it, and you just do all these builds. Get remote desktop or connect to the machine. You should be good.
Yep. But what you can see here is that this is actually connecting to an Azure mobile backend, on the backend that I could create using the Community Edition as well. And then I can kind of go into various things. Now, if we go back to Visual Studio, you can see that basically the debugger has attached. And if I go into the debug windows and I open up the DOM Explorer, I can show all. And I can actually select an element using this and go back to the simulator and just go ahead and select the My Reservations, come back to Visual Studio, and you can see that My Reservations was actually selected here.
Oh, that's very cool.
Yeah.
So it makes it easy to debug the UI of it, right? So if something doesn't look right, you're like, which code generated that?
Well, exactly, and I might even want to go ahead and change that. So I can go ahead and edit as HTML and say, Visual Studio, and just take my cursor off of that. Go back to the iOS simulator. So what you can see here is that we switch back to the simulator and the title bar has changed. Next thing I'm going to do is just show you actually hitting a breakpoint in iOS. So all I'm going to do is delete this row in this case and hit OK. And you can see that the simulator gets paused. We'll go back to Visual Studio. And you can see that I'm actually hitting a breakpoint. And in this case, you can actually see that I have the full call stack here. I also have locals and watch windows and autos and all of the debugging experience that you expect. And I can also start to, step into and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and this is very cool because this is, if you're like a web developer using Visual Studio, you're used to all of these things being available. And now we're saying we're bringing it for using Apache Cordova for cross-platform development, which is really cool.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you so much for the demo. So next, we're going to go ahead and jump to you, Stephen. Let's take a look at Python. But before we jump into the demo, why don't you tell us a little bit more about sort of what Python is for those folks that might not know, and how Visual Studio is kind of a cool way to build Python web apps and scripts and other stuff, right?
Okay, so Python is a really popular scripting language. It's been around 20 plus years at this point. It has a huge community of developers, contributors, people using it in all sorts of fields, everything from financial analysis, industrial automation, astronomy. It gets used a lot, really big in research.
So like scientific research, banking.
Big in scientific, big in banking. It's just really big everywhere because it's such a nice language and so easy to use. And so what we've done with Visual Studio is we're trying to give people a place where they can bring what they're already doing. So we're fully supporting CPython, that's our main focus, because we want people to keep the code they're working on and be able to do that from Visual Studio. So we're not trying to force a different Python on you. It's you have your Python, you have your libraries, you're already using Django for web stuff, you're already using NumPy, SciPy, scikit-learn for your data stuff, bring those. We want to support that. And so we have full support for Python in Visual Studio. We have an interactive window. Python's a very interactive language.
Right.
From its earliest point, it was all about type something, see the results immediately. And
Yeah,
so
it's very different when you're like a .NET developer. You're looking at that interactive, you're thinking something else. But here it's quite the ability to just actually run scripts right there in the IDE.
Absolutely. There's no compile step. There's no, compile, walk away for coffee, come back later. Oh, now it's done. Everything is ready to go straight away. And so we give you that in an interactive window so you can really quickly iterate on whatever you're working on. And one of the best things about Visual Studio is debugging. And so we've brought that to Python as well. Breakpoints, visualizers, you get watch windows, local windows. You can move the bit of code you want to run and rerun things. It's all the power of Visual Studio right there in Python, which is amazing for a lot of Python developers who just haven't ever had that experience.
Yeah, I remember us at PyCon, right? Just recently in Montreal, we were showing this to some developers. They've never seen Visual Studio, and they were like, "What's a breakpoint?" And you showed, and it's a whole different conversation at that point.
Absolutely, yeah. And we've extended that with some more advanced debugging scenarios as well. So we have remote debugging. So using Visual Studio, you can debug Python code that's running on a Mac, running on Linux, from Visual Studio, and have the full Visual Studio debugging experience while your code is running on a completely different machine. And that includes on Azure. So if you have a website or a cloud service running on Microsoft Azure, we can remotely debug that. And I'll show that a bit later on the demo.
Cool.
And because we're in Visual Studio, we have access to all the lifecycle tools that are there. So you can host your code on Visual Studio Online or whatever Git repository you want to use. And there's TFSs there and all the other extensions. Since we have access to all the extensions in Community now, you can use Subversion, you can use Mercurial, because they all have third-party extensions that are now available for Python developers.
Cool. So I remember just again kind of being in Montreal and showing people Visual Studio, but one of the cool things now is that we don't have to explain all the complexity there was, right, of how to get started. Now just you get Community, and then you have to install Python tools separately, right, still, but you get those two and you're ready to go.
Absolutely. We had the same problem as Apache Cordova Tools did. Which Express does Python belong in? And we had people at various times saying, oh, I got Express for desktop and Python doesn't install, or I got Express for web and Python doesn't install. And we know there's a lot of people that get Express for Windows and want to do Python store apps and are really surprised when they can't do that. And so it's going to be great to say, hey, go get Visual Studio Community, install Python into that. It's one track, you can't go wrong.
Cool. All right, well, let's jump into the demo. Take a look.
Okay, so here I'm in Visual Studio Community. I've already installed the Python tools, and I have a website that I've been working on for a little while. It's a really basic task list. It's going to give me some reminders about things that I have to do in my day. I've already published it to Microsoft Azure, so I'll just right-click over here and click View in Browser, and let's have a look at my site. And as usual, it appears something has gone wrong because I'm meant to have some tasks here.
It's a beautiful website. I see you spend a lot of time designing it.
I enlisted the help of some real designers because that is not my work. So something's gone wrong. I'm not seeing the tasks that I should be seeing. So let's come back here to the point where we're rendering this page, and I'll set a breakpoint. Now I can simply right-click and attach the debugger to this website while it's running in the cloud.
Yeah, and the important thing to kind of say here is your site is in Azure. It's deployed in Azure, and it's, it could be your test environment, but if you're crazy, it could be a live environment. But you can attach to it and start a debug session.
Absolutely. So here you can see the URLs on azurewebsites.net. If I refresh the page, then we hit the breakpoint here. And the first thing I'm going to go to is this Python Debug Interactive. We actually give you an interactive console into your live running app, so you can type interactive code. And I can look at my tasks for today. Oh, it's empty. I have no tasks there. What about tomorrow? That's empty as well. If I go back up to the code, then we can have a look and actually see. I can see all of this by hovering as well. Tasks is empty. We didn't get any tasks. So let's bring the next statement back up here. And I can step into it, and we can see what's happened. And it looks like I might not have completely finished this website when I was working on it.
So it happens to the best of us.
So let's do that. And then I can push it up and show you the difference. Now my tasks are stored in Azure Table Storage. So I'm going to use one of our open source libraries that we've written and published for using Azure, the Azure platform from Python. So it's a Python library. You can use pip to install it, which is a standard package manager. And it's just called Azure. Because I'm using table storage, I'm going to import the table service class. And then bring this bit of code back in, and now I have one thing left to write from table service, and you'll notice we have full IntelliSense here. I'm typing very little to get the items that I need.
IntelliSense is such a lifesaver. I could not go back to Notepad, I'll tell you. It's Notepad. The classic ASP days are dead to me.
Yeah, very much so. And again, this is another thing that every time we show Python developers, even the simplest level of IntelliSense, they're blown away by the things that Visual Studio can do.
Yeah, and now it's free and easy for them to get started with it, which I think was one of the biggest blockers.
Absolutely. So now that code is done, and I'm going to republish it. So I'm using web deploy here. If I was using Git deployment, then I could commit this into my repository and push that directly up to my website. In this case, it's web deployment, so I can start a preview, and we'll see there's only a couple of files that have changed, so it's a real minimal redeployment to get this fixed to my website.
And gets it out there.
Just the differential, a couple of automatically generated files that you generally don't need to worry about. And I can push all of these up. And in just a couple of seconds, my website has been updated. It will pop up by itself. And we can see that I now have a list of things that I've got to do today and tomorrow.
Awesome. We just debugged, we fixed it, we deployed it. It's all in source control. It's really awesome.
It's all in source control. It's all freely available. It's a completely open source project. If you go to our website, which will show up in a couple of slides' time, all of our source code's there. We welcome contributions from the community for people who want to work on extensions like this. And it's a great way for other people to get started. We know there's other groups out there using our source code as the basis for their Visual Studio extensions, which are now also available in Visual Studio Community, so it's great.
Right, yeah, that's one of the kind of advantages of Visual Studio Community, because it is open to everybody. The community can write even more extensions, you know, so it's not, there are just basically no restrictions. I guess that's the message we're really trying to get out today. All right, so that was a great demo. Thank you so much for showing it. Over here, we have a slide full of resources. You know, we did just 2 demos, but there's a lot more we could have shown, right? Amanda and I were talking, we could have gotten Unity, for example, the cross-platform mobile game development tools to be shown, but you know, we can't show everything. This video is just to give introduction.
Yeah, way too much.
Yeah, way too much. But these resources will get people started to find the tools we did demo, to find community, to find an extension gallery, and we really hope that our community goes ahead and downloads this SKU of Visual Studio and give us feedback. We'd love to hear from you what you think. And thank you both very much for being in this video.
Thanks for inviting us.
All right. Thank you, everybody.